Chapter 6, Integumentary System, Part 1. So the integumentary system is composed of the skin, and here's a cadaver with its skin on, made up of the dermis and epidermis. And if you remove the skin, underneath is the subcutaneous layer, which is also a part of the integumentary system. Here's another way to look at it. We have the dermis, the epidermis. The epidermis is the superficial portion of the skin. Deep to that is the dermis, so together the epidermis and dermis compose the skin. Deep to that is the subcutaneous layer, and then deep to the subcutaneous layer is the deep fascia, which is connective tissue that helps connect the subcutaneous layer to underlying structures such as muscle. Turns out the skin is the largest organ of the body and has associated with it things like nails, hair, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, so on. So, the epidermis. We will start with the epidermis. The epidermis is made up of stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelium. And it is also keratinized, which means most of the cells are filled with keratin protein, and avascular. There are no blood vessels in the epidermis. Epidermis has 4 to 5 superficial layers that are above the dermis. These layers can be multiple cells thick. The deepest layer is 1 cell thick, so 1 layer of cells. These cells are cuboidal or columnar in shape. They're attached to the basement membrane because, of course, all epidermal epithelial tissue has a basement membrane, and the basement membrane then attaches to the underlying connective tissue of the dermis. Turns out stratum bacilli, as the lowest layer is known, stratum bacilli is where almost all cell division occurs. So all the new cells are produced on the deepest layer, the stratum bacilli, and then get pushed up into the layer above. That obviously means the cells are alive, and the cells found in stratum bacilli include keratinocytes, melanocytes, and tactile cells. The keratinocytes are actually found in all the layers of the skin, epidermis. They are the most common cell of the epidermis, making like 99% of the cells. They are produced in stratum bacilli, and as they travel through the layers, they fill with a protein called keratin, hence the name keratinocytes. Melanocytes. Melanocytes are special cells found in stratum bacilli. They are the skin pigment-producing cells. They produce the pigment melanin, which helps to give the skin the color that it has. And melanin also protects against UV light, UV radiation. And this occurs because the melanocytes place the pigment melanin into keratinocytes that are above it. Those keratinocytes are then pigmented, and their DNA is protected from UV radiation, and that helps to prevent skin cancer. And the more melanin placed into the keratinocytes, the darker the skin is. Tactile cells are also found in stratum bacilli. These are touch receptors. They're sensitive to touch, to the compression of cells. When that happens, they release chemicals that will stimulate a sensory neuron to send a neural signal to the brain. All right, so above stratum bacilli is stratum spinosum. Stratum spinosum is 4 to 8 cells thick. These keratinocytes are starting to attach to each other via desmosomes. So they attach more firmly and solidly by desmosomes. This makes them look kind of spiny, hence the name of the layer, stratum spinosum. Also found in stratum spinosum are specialized immune response cells called epidermal dendritic cells. Again, cells are produced in the stratum bacilli, pushed up into stratum spinosum, and slowly over time get further pushed up to more superficial layers. The cells in stratum spinosum are alive. Some of them can divide, but again, most cell division occurs in stratum spinosum. The epidermal dendritic cells are a type of a phagocytic cell. So what they do is they will engulf pathogens or cancerous cells that are found in the stratum spinosum and destroy them. They stay there. They are permanent cells of the epidermis. Superficial to stratum spinosum is stratum granulosum. Granulosum is 3 to 5 layers thick. Here, the keratinocytes begin the process of apoptosis, programmed cell death. And they begin to produce massive amounts of keratin protein that makes the cells structurally stronger. But in the process, the cells are dying, losing their nucleus, their organelles. But they are still technically still alive in stratum granulosum. Superficial to that is stratum lucidum. Lucidum is 2 to 3 layers of cells thick. These cells are dead, there are no nucleuses. And the stratum lucidum is only found in thick skin, skin found in the palms of the hands, soles of the feet. Superficial to that is stratum corneum. So you either go stratum granulosum, lucidum, corneum in thick skin, or stratum granulosum straight to stratum corneum in thin skin. Stratum corneum is 20 to 30 cells thick. These cells are dead. They are firmly interlocked and attached to each other. They are basically just plasma membranes surrounding lots of keratin protein. These cells are constantly being shed, and they provide an environment that is unsuitable for most microorganisms to grow, although some do survive on our skin. And then if a particular area of your skin is experiencing a lot of friction, say you start playing the guitar, then that area will thicken because of increased cell division and lead to a much, much thicker stratum corneum. So a callus is a dramatically thickened stratum corneum. All right, thick skin and thin skin. Thick skin, again, found in the palms of the hands, soles of the feet, has extremely thick stratum corneum, also possesses a stratum lucidum. Thin skin, on the other hand, is everywhere else, has no stratum lucidum and a thinner stratum corneum. Thick skin possesses stratum lucidum, thick stratum corneum, no hair. Our thick skin does not possess hair. No sebaceous glands, because they're always associated with hair. And again, soles of the feet, palms of the hands. Skin color. Skin color is determined by 3 main pigments: by hemoglobin, which is the pigment in our blood. And because blood vessels are near the surface of our skin, this can cause our skin to look a little pinkish, especially when someone is blushing. Melanin. Melanin is the pigment produced by melanocytes. It increases in production when people are exposed to UV radiation. And again, the pigment is placed into the keratinocytes. And then keratin. Keratin is a yellow-orange pigment from foods. It builds up in our subcutaneous layer and in the stratum corneum, and it can be converted into vitamin A, and that can give skin a slightly orangish yellow color. Melanin is the primary pigment for determining skin color. All right, a nevus is commonly known as a mole. This is a benign tumor formed when a melanocyte is overgrowing. So you have a massive production of melanocytes that produce lots of melanin, leading to a benign tumor or nevus. Normally, these are harmless tumors, but you should always pay attention to them because occasionally they can become malignant. Freckles are yellowish or brownish spots. They are areas where there is an increased activity in melanocytes. So more pigment is being produced in those localized areas, darkening those patches of skin. And this can be increased based on increased sun exposure and heredity. Hemangioma are types of birthmarks. You have basically discolorations in the skin because of benign overgrowth of blood vessels. Papillary hemangiomas appear bright red, and they often appear at birth and then disappear over time. Cavernous hemangiomas are large dermal vessels, blood vessels that are overgrown. They tend to last the entire person's life. Ridge patterns on the skin, more commonly known as fingerprints or friction ridges, can be arches, swirls, etc. They are unique to individuals, even different between identical twins. Basically, the interlocking between the epidermis and dermis, these folds and valleys, are what form the ridge patterns, and they are most obvious in thick skin. And it's thought that the presence of these rigid patterns is to increase friction, so it's easier for us to hold things with our hands and fingers. Functions of epidermis. Well, protection. Huge physical barrier that protects us from abrasions and protects underlying tissues. It protects from physical trauma, from chemicals, toxins, microbes, extreme temperatures, and also solar radiation. So big protective function for epidermis. Also prevents water loss. We will be losing water through our skin, but it decreases the amount of water loss. So our skin is water resistant, not waterproof. Metabolic regulation. It is important in vitamin D production. Turns out that we can produce all the vitamin D we want, and the process occurs in our epidermis. Basically, a precursor to vitamin D is exposed to UV light, and that UV radiation exposure helps turn it into the next stage of the vitamin D production. It's transported to the liver, finally to the kidneys, where it's being processed and modified, and eventually is the active form of vitamin D. And the job of vitamin D, it turns out, is to increase absorption of calcium and phosphate by the digestive system. And of course, UV rays also stimulate melanocytes to produce melanin. Secretion and absorption, we secrete things like sweat so we can get rid of some waste, urea, some salts, and water. We also have sebum, oily secretion being produced by the sebaceous glands to lubricate the skin and hair, keep it supple. And some absorption, we can absorb some things that are lipid soluble. It can be absorbed through the plasma membrane, through the skin. Immune function, the epidermal dendritic cells have a phagocytic function. They engulf pathogens, engulf cancer cells. All right, moving on to the dermis. Dermis is composed primarily of areolar and dense irregular connective tissue. It has lots and lots of collagen fibers and some elastic and reticular fibers. Structures are embedded in the dermis: blood vessels, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, the hair follicles, nail roots, nerve endings, erector pili muscles, lots of things embedded in the dermis. They're important for skin function. And the dermis can be broken into the papillary layer, which is superficial, and the reticular layer, which is deep. The papillary layer is primarily made of areolar connective tissue. It forms these little projections that push up into the epidermis so that we end up with finger-like interlocking structures between the epidermis and dermis. They're called the dermal papillae. They are important for keeping a strong connection between the epidermis and dermis because we do not want them to separate. If the epidermis separates from the dermis, you will develop blisters. And so it is very important. Dermal papillae also contain lots of blood capillaries to provide nutrients for the epidermis and also sensory receptors. The reticular layer is deep to the papillary layer. It connects to the subcutaneous layer below that. It is composed primarily of dense, irregular connective tissue, lots of large bundles of collagen fibers forming a mesh going in all kinds of directions to give the skin its strength so it can resist pulling forces. Lines of cleavage. Lines of cleavage are when the collagen and elastic fibers have an overall orientation within the skin. There are certain areas where those lines are going in certain directions. These lines of cleavage are important because during any sort of surgery, it's better to cut in a manner that runs parallel with the lines of cleavage rather than perpendicular, and parallel will then heal quicker. Stretch marks are when the collagen fibers are damaged and cannot repair correctly, and so you have these torn fibers leaving the stretched marks. Also, over time, the dermis loses its flexibility and thickness from UV light, from aging, making sagging and wrinkles develop. And then the dermis also possesses sensory receptors to detect touch, pressure, vibration, temperature, and nerve fibers to control the glands and blood flow. And those blood flows involved in temperature regulation, supplying nutrients, and blood pressure. And we will have to stop here.